The ceramic mug shattered against the hardwood floor, sending shards of porcelain and hot cocoa flying across the pristine kitchen tiles. But the sound was barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. I stood frozen in the hallway shadow, clutching the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. My breath caught in a throat that suddenly felt lined with sandpaper. Just seconds before, I had been the picture of the doting grandmother, humming a Christmas carol while preparing a warm drink for my daughter, Jessica, who was visiting from the city. Now, I was a ghost in my own home, rendered invisible by the cruel, casual words drifting from the living room. Jessica was on the phone with her brother, Michael, and her voice did not hold the warmth she usually feigned in my presence. Instead, it carried a chilling, calculated indifference that sliced through me colder than the December wind outside. She was saying that they should just dump the kids on me for the entire 10 days of the holidays because I had absolutely no life anyway and I existed solely to serve them. She laughed, a sharp, jagged sound, telling Michael that they could finally take that couple's trip to Aspen they had been planning, leaving all 7 grandchildren with me in this big, empty house. She called me a built-in babysitter with zero overhead costs. Zero overhead costs, as if I were a piece of depreciating machinery in a warehouse, rather than the woman who had birthed her, raised her, and sacrificed every shred of personal ambition to ensure she had the life she was now living. The cocoa was seeping into my socks, hot and sticky. They would drop the children off on the 23rd, perform the obligatory hour of family pleasantries, and then vanish until after New Year's Day, Jessica continued, her voice dripping with entitlement, explaining that I had already bought all the gifts and stocked the fridge, so they wouldn't even have to spend a dime on food or presents. It was the perfect crime, she joked. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a tightening that wasn't a heart attack but something far worse. It was the heart-shattering realization that my children did not love me. They managed me. They utilized me. To them, Evelyn Thorne, 72 years old, widow, former literature professor, and mother of 2, was nothing more than a logistical convenience, a resource to be mined until it was empty. I backed away slowly, stepping over the puddle of cocoa, and retreated up the back stairs to the sanctuary of my bedroom. I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I hit the floor. The tears didn't come immediately. Instead, a cold, hard rage began to crystallize in my stomach, replacing the warmth that had resided there for decades. I looked around my bedroom. It was a shrine to a family that apparently didn't exist. Every surface was covered in framed photographs. There was Michael at his law school graduation, looking handsome and proud, with me beaming in the background, slightly out of focus. There was Jessica at her wedding, radiant in white, while I stood off to the side holding her bouquet, invisible to the camera's eye. There were endless snapshots of the 7 grandchildren, my beautiful, chaotic angels, whom I loved with a ferocity that scared me sometimes. But as I looked closer, really looked, I saw the pattern. I was always the support structure. I was the one holding the coats, the one serving the cake, the one wiping the faces. I was the background noise to their symphony. I stood up and walked to the closet where the hidden stash of Christmas gifts lay waiting. It was an embarrassment of riches. I had spent months curating these gifts. There were high-end gaming consoles, designer jackets, rare book sets, and intricate Lego structures. I had dipped into my savings, the money Arthur had left me to travel the world. Money I never used for myself, because I was too busy being available for them. I did the mental math. Nearly $4,000 in gifts sat in that closet. Then, there was the food. I had pre-ordered a massive prime rib, a turkey, specialized sides from the gourmet grocer, and cases of expensive wine that Michael liked. Another $1,500. I had hired a cleaning crew to come in before and after, paid for out of my own pocket, to ensure the house was hotel-ready for them. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my hands. They were aging. Yes, spotted with liver spots and marked by blue veins. but they were strong hands, hands that had graded thousands of papers, planted gardens, soothed fevers, and held a dying husband's hand until the very end. Arthur. My sweet, noble Arthur. He had been gone for 15 years, and in those 15 years, I had allowed myself to shrink. I had allowed our children to carve away pieces of me until there was almost nothing left but a function. Mom will do it. Mom will pay for it. Mom will be there. I remembered the Christmas after Arthur died. I was drowning in grief, barely able to get out of bed. But Jessica had insisted that we keep the traditions alive for the grandkids. So I cooked. I cooked for 3 days straight, weeping into the dough when no one was looking. And when dinner was served, Michael had complained that the turkey was a bit dry. No one had asked me how I was coping. No one had toasted their father. They just ate, took their gifts, and left me alone with a mountain of dirty dishes and a silence so loud it rang in my ears. That was the precedent. That was the moment I taught them how to treat me. I had accepted the crumbs of their affection and called it a feast. But hearing Jessica today, hearing the utter lack of respect, the calculation, the mockery, something snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a realignment. The rage that had started in my stomach moved into my veins, clearing my head with a terrifying clarity. I stood up and walked to my desk. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. My hand was steady as I wrote the first item on the list. Cancel the butcher order. Then, cancel the bakery order. Then, return the gifts. Finally, book a flight. I stared at the words. They looked like a declaration of independence. I didn't go back downstairs. I waited until I heard Jessica leave the house to meet a friend for dinner. She didn't even yell goodbye. She just slammed the front door. Once the house was quiet, I went into action. It was too late to call the stores, but I spent the evening gathering receipts and organizing the boxes. I packed the gaming consoles, the clothes, the toys, into the back of my SUV. I worked with a manic energy, fueled by adrenaline and years of suppressed resentment. When the car was loaded, I went back to my room and pulled out my old suitcase, the dusty one Arthur and I had taken to Paris for our 25th anniversary. I opened it and smelled the faint scent of lavender and old leather. Wool sweaters, comfortable trousers, my sturdy walking boots, a sketchbook I hadn't touched in a decade, and my painting supplies. Then, I picked up the phone and dialed the one number I knew by heart, the one person who had been telling me for years to stop being a doormat. Eleanor. Eleanor was a firecracker, a woman who had sold her house, bought a condo, and spent her retirement traveling to places I only read about in National Geographic. "Evelyn?" she said, her voice raspy from cigarettes and red wine. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I took a deep breath. "Is that offer to join you at the beach house in the Outer Banks still open?" There was a pause. A heavy silence on the line. Then Eleanor laughed, a rich, throaty sound. "Honey, the offer is always open. But what about the royal family? What about the impending coronation of the grandchildren?" "They are cancelled," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Christmas is cancelled. I need to get out of here, Eleanor. I need to leave tomorrow." Eleanor didn't ask questions. She didn't ask for details. She simply said, "I'll have the guest room ready. The heating is on, the wine is breathing, and the ocean is loud. Get in the car, Evelyn." I hung up and felt a wave of relief, so potent it nearly knocked me over. I wasn't trapped. I had never been trapped. I had just been standing in an open cage waiting for permission to fly. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was silent, wrapped in the blue light of winter. I dressed quickly and made a pot of coffee. I didn't drink it in the kitchen. I drank it, standing by the window, watching the sun struggle to rise over the frosted lawn. At 8 o'clock sharp, when the stores opened, I was the first person in line at the electronics store. The return process was tedious. The clerk looked at me with suspicion. A grandmother returning thousands of dollars of high-end tech days before Christmas. Is there something wrong with the items? He asked. No, I replied, staring him dead in the eye. There is something wrong with the recipients. He processed the refund. The money went back onto my card. $1,000 here, $500 there. I went to the department store next. The designer coats, the cashmere sweaters, the silk scarves I had bought for Jessica. Returned. The expensive watch for Michael. Returned. By noon, I had reclaimed nearly $5,000. I felt lighter with every receipt I signed. I drove to the gourmet grocer and canceled the order. The butcher was annoyed, telling me he had already set the prime rib aside. I told him to donate it to the shelter downtown, and paid for it anyway. It was the only money I spent that day that felt good. I returned home and wrote a note. I didn't text them. I didn't email. I wanted them to have something physical to hold. Something that couldn't be deleted with a swipe. I left the note on the kitchen island, right where the prime rib should have been. It was short. Dear Jessica and Michael, I overheard your conversation yesterday. I understand that I am a convenient, zero overhead babysitter to you. I understand that my role is to provide a venue and labor for your holidays while you vacation elsewhere. Unfortunately, this employee has retired effective immediately. The gifts have been returned. The food has been canceled. The house is closed for the holidays. I suggest you make alternate arrangements for your children. Do not look for me. I am safe. And for the first time in years, I am happy. Mom. I locked the house, set the alarm, and got into my car. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house one last time. It was a beautiful house. A stately brick colonial that Arthur and I had bought 40 years ago. But without him, and with the way my children treated it, it had become a mausoleum. A boarding house where the guests were ungrateful, and the landlady was overworked. I turned the car south and didn't look back. The drive to North Carolina was long, but I didn't mind. I listened to audiobooks. I listened to jazz. I listened to silence. I stopped at roadside diners and ate pie without worrying about my cholesterol. I felt like a fugitive. But a fugitive, running towards something. Not away. When I arrived at Eleanor's beach house, it was dark. The sound of the ocean was a dull roar in the distance. The house was warm and smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary. Eleanor met me at the door with a glass of Pinot Noir in one hand and a hug that cracked my ribs. You look terrible, she told me affectionately. You look like a woman who has been carrying a piano on her back for 20 years. I feel like I just dropped it, I said, taking the wine. We sat on her deck, wrapped in heavy blankets, watching the invisible waves crash against the shore. I told her everything. I told her about the cocoa, the phone call, the years of neglect, the birthdays where I received a text message and nothing else. Eleanor listened, nodding, her face illuminated by the ember of her cigarette. They are parasites, Evelyn, she said bluntly. And you are the host. It's harsh, but it's true. You taught them that you don't matter. You taught them that your needs are secondary to their whims. And now you have to teach them a new lesson. It's going to hurt. They are going to lash out. They are going to try to make you feel guilty. That is their weapon. Your weapon is indifference. Can you do it? I thought about the little faces of my grandchildren. I thought about missing Christmas morning. A pang of sorrow hit me, sharp and deep. But then I heard Jessica's voice in my head again. Zero overhead costs. Yes, I said. I can do it. The next morning, the bombardment began. I had turned my phone on to check the weather, and the notifications flooded in like a tsunami. 27 missed calls, 50 text messages, voicemails that filled the memory. It started with confusion. Mom, where are you? Mom, this isn't funny. Then it turned to panic. Mom, the butcher says you canceled the order. Mom, where are the presents? Then, Inevitably, it turned to rage. Jessica's texts were blistering. How could you do this to us? We have non-refundable tickets to Aspen. You are ruining Christmas for the kids. You are selfish. You are senile. Michael's texts were more pathetic. Mom, please. Jessica is freaking out. Just come back and we can talk. We need you. We need you. Not we love you. Not we miss you. We need you. That distinction, which I had ignored for so long, was now the only thing I could see. I typed a single response to the group chat. I am taking a vacation. You are adults. Figure it out. Then I blocked their numbers. I felt a surge of adrenaline, followed by a wave of nausea. It went against every biological imperative I had as a mother to cut them off, but I knew that if I answered the phone, if I heard their voices, I would cave. I would apologize. I would drive back and fix it. And nothing would ever change. I spent the next week rediscovering who Evelyn Thorne was. I walked on the beach for hours, collecting sea glass and letting the salt wind scrub my skin raw. I painted. I set up my easel on the deck and painted the stormy Atlantic. My strokes were angry at first, jagged and dark, but slowly, as the days passed, they became softer, more fluid. I painted the light breaking through the clouds. I read books that had nothing to do with parenting or housekeeping. I slept until 10 in the morning. I drank wine at lunch. I ate fresh seafood that Eleanor grilled. I laughed. I laughed until my stomach hurt. Christmas Day arrived with a brilliant, blinding sun. There was no tree, no pile of gifts, no screaming children, no mountain of wrapping paper to clean up. Eleanor and I made a seafood stew and ate it with crusty bread. We FaceTimed with some of her friends in Europe. We toasted to ourselves. It was the most peaceful Christmas I had experienced in 2 decades. But in the quiet moments, I wondered about them. I wondered if they had gone to Aspen. I wondered if the kids were crying. I wondered if they hated me. 2 days after Christmas, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs. Eleanor looked out the window. Well, she said, it looks like the cavalry has arrived. Or the Inquisition. I went to the window. It was Michael's SUV. He and Jessica were getting out, looking disheveled and furious. They had driven 12 hours to find me. They must have tracked my phone before I blocked them, or maybe called Aunt Sarah, who always had a big mouth. Don't let them in, Eleanor said. It's your house. Eleanor, I said. I can't ask you to bar the door. Eleanor smiled. Honey, I'm just the spectator here. This is your show. You decide. I took a deep breath. I walked to the front door and opened it. They were storming up the steps, ready to unleash hell. When they saw me, they stopped. Maybe it was the way I was standing, straighter than usual. Maybe it was the fact that I wasn't wearing my usual apron or sensible cardigan, but a vibrant silk caftan Eleanor had lent me. Mom! Jessica screamed. Have you lost your mind? Do you have any idea what you put us through? We had to cancel Aspen. We lost thousands of dollars. We had to stay in that house with nothing prepared. The kids were miserable. Michael chimed in, looking exhausted. Mom, seriously. This was cruel. Dad would be ashamed of you. That was the trigger. The mention of Arthur. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me, engaging them in the cold ocean air. Do not speak to me about your father, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Your father treated me like a queen. You treat me like a servant. There is a difference, Jessica scoffed, crossing her arms. We treat you like family. Family helps each other. Family respects each other, I countered. I heard you, Jessica. I heard you on the phone. 0 overhead costs. Nothing else to do. That is what you think of me. That is who I am to you. A line item in your budget. A convenience. Jessica turned red. I was just venting. I didn't mean it. You meant every word, I said sadly. And the worst part is, I let you believe it. I let you treat me this way because I thought that if I gave enough, if I did enough, you would finally love me the way I love you. But you don't. You love what I do for you. You don't love me. That's not true. Michael protested, but his eyes looked away. It is true, I said. When was the last time you asked me about my book club? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? When was the last time you visited without bringing the kids for me to watch? They were silent. The wind whipped around us, stinging our faces. I am done, I told them. I am done being the victim of my own motherhood. I am selling the house. What? Jessica gasped. You can't. That's our childhood home. It's my asset, I said. It's too big for me. It's filled with ghosts. I'm selling it. I'm going to buy a condo in the city, near the museums. I'm going to travel. I'm going to spend my money on myself. And if you want to see me, if you want your children to know their grandmother, you will come to visit me on my terms. You will invite me to dinner, and I will sit as a guest. I will not cook. I will not clean. And I will never, ever be your babysitter again. Mom, you're being irrational, Jessica pleaded, her voice cracking. You're having a breakdown. No, sweetheart, I smiled, and it was a genuine smile. I'm having a breakthrough. Now, get in your car and drive back. I have a painting to finish. I turned around and walked back into the house. I didn't wait for them to leave. I didn't watch them go. I went back to the deck where my easel was waiting. Eleanor was there, holding a fresh glass of wine. You are terrifying, she said admiringly, and magnificent. I picked up my brush. My hands were steady. The ocean was vast and blue and endless. I thought about my children driving back north, angry and confused. They would have to learn to be parents without a safety net. They would have to learn to be adults. Maybe, in time, they would forgive me. Maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time in my life, I realized that their forgiveness was not required for my happiness. I looked at the canvas. I was painting a sunrise. It wasn't perfect, but it was bright, and it was bold, and it was entirely mine. I took a sip of wine and dipped the brush in the yellow paint. I had 72 years behind me, but for the first time, I felt like I was just getting started. The best years were not the ones I had given away. They were the ones I was about to claim.